So the first thing we're going to talk about is fly cutters. So if you remember, face mills are multi-inserted or multi-toothed cutting tools. On a milling machine, all of our tools are multi-tooth cutting tools with the exception of one. And this is that one, right? The fly cutter. So as you can see with the arbor, it would fit into a collet. Notice that this arbor right here, it's a straight shank. So we would hold this arbor in a collet. If we're using a mill that has an R8 taper, then we would use an R8 collet that this arbor would fit inside of, and it would be drawn up inside the spindle. So, this is a pretty simple cutting tool and a pretty simple design. So these two set screws here, obviously we loosen them and tighten them to put in our cutting tool or to adjust or slide the cutting tool. So these are usually set on a 10-degree angle approximately. So this angle that you see here would be about 10 degrees from the horizon. So the slot that's cut into this holder would be the diameter, or the width rather, of this cutting tool. And we can get these fly cutters in various sizes, various size slots to hold a selection of different types of cutting tools. And there's, of course, here's an example of a square cutting tool, but of course we can hold round as well. And these are a very simple tool to make. As a matter of fact, a lot of colleges and high schools, one of their projects will be making a fly cutter. And fly cutters are used when we want to create a flat surface. They are a face mill, really, but they only have one cutting edge, right? And that's, of course, the cutting edge here. They're less expensive than face mills, and they're actually really, really practical and useful on smaller mills that don't have the horsepower, they don't have the spindle speed capabilities of larger machines. So the fly cutter, it leaves a very smooth finish as well. And that's a real benefit of fly cutters, is you have great control over the finish by speeding up the spindle speed or slowing down the feed rate. Because it's a single point cutting tool, you're really cautious and you're really careful about your feed and speed, because you can see any imperfections, because it's only one cutting tooth that's coming into contact with that workpiece. One of the benefits of the fly cutter over the face mill is the ability to adjust the size of the cutting area. So here's an example of another fly cutter, just like the other one, but notice the how much tool here, how much of the blank is sticking out the back side. So we can loosen these two set screws and slide this tool down, lengthening it, right? Giving us a wider sweep, a wider cutting area. The design of the fly cutter and the depth of the cut, though, they really do play a part in the amount of hangout that we decide to use. So you can imagine that if this were a small fly cutter, here's a good example. This is only a 3/16 by 3/16 high-speed steel tool bit, right? So it's fairly small in comparison to other cutting tools, and so would this fly cutter itself, right? So you can imagine the farther that you pull out this cutting tool, the more vibration that we would get, right? We would get the farther that hangout, the more vibration. The more vibration causes like imperfections on the workpiece. So the more rigid, right? The larger the tool holder, the larger the tool, the more control we have over our spindle speed and our feed rate, will allow us to use tools that can extend much farther away. Like we could use this tool. Let's imagine that this the head here on this fly cutter is 4 inches in diameter. So we know we could cut at least a 4-inch diameter, but perhaps we could draw out this cutting tool by loosening these set screws, draw out the cutting tool and then tighten up these set screws. And maybe we could cut, by pulling this out an extra 2 inches, we can now cut an 8-inch diameter, right? So if we add 2 inches to this side, then that adds 2 inches to the other side. So you can see how quickly we can cover a large surface area with one cutting tool. Another thing that we want to consider with fly cutters, and there can be some controversy. Everybody's got an opinion on these things, but in the manual milling world, it's very, very common to see fly cutters being used. A lot of times we're going to use face mills, for sure we are. But in most cases, especially when it comes to manual milling, where we're kind of limited in our tool selection and feeds and speeds, in most cases, the best finish is achieved when you can cut something in a single pass. And fly cutters allow us to do that. So again, like go back to this example. If the head on this fly cutter were 4 inches in diameter, which would be a fairly big fly cutter, right? Then let's imagine that the length of tool that we could put in there could cover 8 inches in diameter. Well, if you had a 4-inch face mill in the shop with, maybe 10 teeth on it, well, you could make a 4-inch diameter pass on your work, but then you'd have to move over if it was, let's say 7.5 inches wide, your workpiece, you would have to move over, and step over your cut and take a second cut going in the other direction. So you would have to make at least 2 cuts if your piece of material was 7.5 inches wide, if you had a face mill that was only 4 inches in diameter. But if you had a fly cutter where you could extend your cutting tool out to cover an 8-inch range, then that's an ideal situation to have your cutting tool cutting all of the material, but also coming off the workpiece in every pass, right? Because then you get the same cut in every stroke, in every rotation, all the way across the workpiece. And again, it results in the best finish by cutting the surface of a part in only one cut. So if I can give some advice, even if you don't have a fly cutter, if there is a way that you can square up a block or you can finish a surface by only taking one pass and by cutting the entire surface in one cut, then that would be the best way to go. So if you have a 4-inch wide workpiece and you have a 4.5-inch wide face mill or a 3.5-inch wide face mill or a 2-inch wide face mill, always go with the one that will cover the whole workpiece in one pass whenever possible. And if you don't have a fly cutter and you'd like one, there are all kinds of free prints online to make fly cutters. So what a great project it would be to make your own fly cutter.